So thanks to the multidisciplinary team in Gokulam as well as GG Hospital. Thanks to Joshi John sir, Ramachandran, Peethambaran, everyone for continuing this program and giving us opportunities like this. Just guidelines for ASGK MGR quiz. Only one question. Complete details in a single slide. Please type your answer. It could be one word or phrase in the Zoom chat box as personal message. Please not. Please, your response should be as a personal message, not as a group message to Quizmaster. My name is Arun Kumar ML. As soon as possible. Only one prize. The first correct answer in the personal chat box will get it. So the answer should be correct. Secondly, time is also important. Results will be announced at the end of the session, and Quizmaster's decision will be final. Please open your Zoom chat box and select Arun Kumar ML and to type a personal message. Now, the only one question today is an intraoperative clip. This is a 26-year-old young gentleman who has a recurrent history of subacute intestinal obstruction, and he gives history of colicky pain and occasional bilious vomiting. Recurrent episodes. We have a preoperative CT, but let's see how far we can catch the diagnosis. So you need to write the diagnosis from this operative clip. The vision is through an infra-umbilical port. That means hypogastric port, camera vision. We have found out a problem and trying to solve the problem with laparoscopy. The initial part will be the findings. I'll play the video again. The view is towards the left upper quadrant from the hypogastrium. Once again, the view is towards the left upper quadrant from the hypogastrium. Please write the diagnosis. Once again, recurrent subacute intestinal obstruction. I think that's fine. Thank you so much. Please write your answer very well. I've stopped sharing my slide. Now back to Joshi sir, please.
Thank you, Arun, for the quiz. So we'll now move on to the session. The speaker for today is the MCH resident from GA Surgery Department, Dr. What your name? I think the initial there was a change in the name.
Dr. Akshadhar.
Dr. Akshadhar Koneti, yes, and he'll be speaking on an interesting case of pancreas. We would love to hear from him. May I ask Dr. Rajesh Nambiar to moderate the session? Thank you all for participating. We now have around 25 participants. We hope more will join. Rajesh Nambiar, please take over.
Thank you, Joshi sir, for the kind introduction. When I read the topic, I really did not understand much. Peethambaran had to help me and tell me what it was all about. So without wasting much time, I invite the speaker, Dr. Akshadhar, to start his presentation. Dr. Akshadhar, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes, you are audible.
Good evening, one and all, respected gastrosurgeons of Kerala, present faculty members, and I'd like to start off with the.
You're not loud enough.
Can you sit closer to the mic, please? Yeah.
Yeah, you're not very clear.
I'd like to start off with my presentation. Headed was pancreas, not all flesh. Hyperamylesemia that came under the knife is today's topic. So the case report is of a 31-year-old gentleman. He was referred from Andamans, and he was admitted under the Department of Rheumatology at Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences, Kochi. He had the following symptoms. Basically, he had high-grade fever with chills and tightness for a period of 10 days. He also had joint pains of both the knees and the right elbow and left wrist. No morning stiffness though. And he also had certain erythematous patches in the right lower limb. On examination, there was some pallor, no lymphadenopathy or cyanosis, no icterus. On local examination of his limbs, the left lower limb was edematous and was warm, tender over the calf. The right knee was swollen. There was some effusion and the tenderness was also present. The same goes with the right elbow as well. But the only difference was the elbow swelling was non-tender. It was kind of a random arthritis, polyarthritis. For abdomen, the abdomen was soft, it was non-tender, and there was no organomegaly. Also, there were erythematous patches over the right lower limb, which were non-tender. The patient has a background of bilateral renal caliculi, for which a DG stenting was done previously in 2019. And also he had a fever of history of fever and abdominal pain back in 2019. So initial diagnosis and course in the Department of Rheumatology, they had diagnosed it as pyrexia of unknown origin with suspected reactive polyarthritis. They didn't know the etiology though, so they ran a couple of full labs. Outside testing was done previously before he came to our hospital. There an ACE level of about 72 nanograms was detected, and they suspected sarcoidosis. And he was on Azuran and rituximab, which was prescribed outside. He came to Amrita, and the lab test showed rheumatoid factor negative, ANA immunofluorescence antibody negative. Dengue serology was positive for IgM. However, his symptoms, he did not, his platelet counts were normal and the CBC panel was normal. ESR was 85 and IgE was 156. Serum amylase was 1800 and serum lipase was 3800. Because of the complaints of his pain in the lower limbs, Doppler of the lower limbs was done, which showed no evidence of deep vein thrombosis. But however, there was a collection about 17 to 2 to 3 centimeters in the left lower limb or in the region of the calf. It was seen in the intermuscular plane extending from the popliteal fossa to the mid 1/3 of the leg. There was, however, no synovial communication detectable on the Doppler. Following this, an MRI was done, which showed bilateral synovitis of the lower knees and some joint space effusion as well. They were suspected a Baker's cyst as well. The important thing to note here is there were abnormal marrow signals and no cortical collection. We'll come to the MRI picture in the next slide. I'd just like to complete by saying that fundus examination showed no picture of uveitis. Joint space aspiration was done, and the fluid cytology showed only inflammatory cells and no ATPL. Blood cultures and synovial fluid cultures were negative for any organisms. This is the MRI picture which was showing abnormal marrow signals, as we can see. Some kind of necrotic picture, what thinking of. Following this, rheumatology had given a consultation to dermatology, who had advised a skin biopsy. So a skin biopsy from the right shin from one of the erythematous nodules was done. This showed the epidermis and dermis to be unremarkable, and there was subcutaneous fat necrosis similar to enzymatic necrosis. There were foam cells seen and two-tone giant cells, and there was deposition of eosinophilic amorphous material and neutrophilic infiltrate. Also seen were calcifications. Accordingly, a CT abdomen was also done because the patient was complaining of abdominal pain as well, and incidentally detected serum amylase and lipase levels. So, and he was also a known case of chronic calcific pancreatitis previously detected outside. So the CT abdomen done showed chronic calcific pancreatitis with mild atrophy of the head and uncinate, no dilatation of the main pancreatic duct or no calculus. There were no features of acute pancreatitis, and a single calculus was noted in the uncinate process. Also noted was a segmental thrombosis in the right posterior portal vein. Right renal calculus was seen, which was same as previous, same as the previous CT, which was non-obstructing, no hydroureteral necrosis. This CT is showing some calculi in the uncinate process. Following this, a GI surgery consult was given. This case was initially seen by a second-year resident. The resident noticed very high amylase and lipase levels with no features of acute pancreatitis. And there was some segmental thrombosis of the portal vein, as I already mentioned. The patient did not have any other features of hypercoagulopathy to suggest this. So the skin biopsy was again discussed with the pathology department and dermatology, and they suggested that there was a picture of pancreatic panniculitis. At this juncture, in keeping in view the abnormally high levels of amylase and lipase, and no particular picture of acute pancreatitis, but a patient having diffuse fatty necrosis in certain areas and some bone marrow necrosis features, we decided to operate, keeping in view that there could be some abnormal connection. So intraoperatively, the patient went under the knife on 21st of March 2020. Reversal incision was given, the duodenum was cauterized. We approached the pancreas. On seeing the pancreas, it was noted that there was an inflamed uncinate process stuck to the SMB. The SMB was looped above and below, and the uncinate was gradually separated from the SMB. There was a minor bleed, and this was controlled using 6-O-proline. On palpation, the uncinate had certain stones, as already mentioned in the CT, and also there was certain calcifications of stones present in the head of the pancreas. So the uncinate duct was opened, and the stones were cleared off. Following this, a de-roofing of the uncinate was done up to the main pancreatic duct. The posterior pancreatic capsule was, however, left intact. Now, Roux-en-Y pancreaticojejunostomy was performed, and this was followed by a jejunojejunostomy. The postoperative period, this patient was re-explored on the second post-op day for some reactionary hemorrhage. The hemorrhage was found to be in the dissection plane of the SMA and the SMB. After this, the postoperative period was uneventful. There was a drop in the lipase and amylase levels as seen from thousands to 3-digit numbers on post-op day 1. There was complete resolution of all the symptoms and complete normal pancreatic enzymatic levels by POD4. Drastic change. The joint effusion erythema the erythematous patches resolved as well. The patient was successfully discharged with minimal drain output. And this patient has been on regular follow-up and is doing well since then for nearly 1.5 years. He's gone back to Andaman. He's leading a good life. So we were thinking of an entity known as PPP syndrome. So pancreatitis, panniculitis, and polyarthritis syndrome. This was our conclusive diagnosis because this alone was explaining the features of drastically raised amylase and lipase, especially lipase levels, the bony, the joint effusions. Hello. Yeah, the joint effusions and the skin nodules as well. So pancreatic panniculitis is seen in 2 to 3% of patients with pancreatitis. It was first described by Chiari in 1883. What is rare is the triad of pancreatitis, panniculitis, and polyarthritis, all three being seen in the same patient, which seldom occurs. And in addition to our case, we found 32 other well-documented cases in review of the literature. Pathogenesis is not very clear. There is a theory that direct secretion of pancreatic enzymes into the bloodstream can cause this kind of picture of systemic fat necrosis, especially in the subcutaneous tissue, the bones, and the joints. So there are exceptional high levels of lipase and amylase seen in most of the patients. The arthritis is caused by free fatty acids that are released into the joint after necrosis, after the lipolytic pancreatic enzymes such as amylase and lipase have hydrolyzed the triglycerides in the joint near the bone marrow. What can be seen is that the level of lipase does not correspond with the severity of the pancreatitis and corresponds in fact with the extent of the extra pancreatic fat tissue necrosis. TPP syndrome can occur at any age and typically is seen in middle-aged males who have a history of heavy alcohol abuse, either in the past or the present. And this syndrome can precede or it can coincide or succeed the pancreatic disease. It is seen mostly preceding this. The etiological factors, as already mentioned, are one is ethanol abuse, leading to acute or chronic pancreatitis. Secondly, it can also be seen in pancreatic carcinoma, neuroendocrine carcinoma of the pancreas, insulinoma, ischemic pancreatic disease, and any abdominal trauma affecting the pancreas or causing pancreatic duct stenosis. Some authors have described presence of a pseudocyst, and some in their papers of case reports have detected a fistula between the pseudocyst and the superior mesenteric vein. Tiny fistulas are difficult to visualize in preoperative imaging, and presence of mesenteric vein thrombosis should be an indirect sign and should always lead to surgical exploration rather than delaying the diagnosis. Emphasis should be placed in the fact that most abdominal symptoms are mild or absent despite high levels of amylase. The usual presentation is that panicleitis is seen as painful erythematous reddish brown nodules, which are typically seen over the lower extremities. And the cutaneous manifestations may precede the pancreatic disease or can coincide with it also. Spontaneous rupture of these skin lesions can lead to secretion, extrusion of an olive brown viscous material. Now, differential diagnosis for these skin lesions can be erythema nodosum, vasculitis, Sweet syndrome, and alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. Histologically, after taking a biopsy, these lesions show a lobular panicleitis without any vasculitis and surrounding inflammation. And what are known as pathognomic findings are ghost adipocytes, which are fat cells with some calcification and no vasculitis. Arthritis is rarer, and it is seen either as a severe monoarthritis or can be seen as polyarthritis of the ankles, knees, wrists, the metacarpal joints, elbows, and tarsal joints. The analysis of we also see joint effusions following this syndrome, and in this syndrome, and the aspirate usually shows a sterile thick yellow material with a neutrophilic picture. The other manifestations can be chondronecrosis and necrosis of the intramedullary bones and GI submucosa if the pancreatic enzymes are too high and affect these areas as well. And when it comes to the joints being affected, is usually the lower extremities and the distal parts which are mostly affected. Pathological features are seen mostly, pathological fractures are seen mostly in progressive disease as the disease progresses. And the best imaging modality for diagnosing intramedullary fat necrosis is MRI. CT is used for detecting secondary bone damages in these patients. Treatment, as in other cases, is just to treat the cause. Treat the pancreatic disease, treat the fistula, which is leading to the buildup of enzymes and causing which is leading to the pathogenesis of this disease. So what we need to treat is acute or the chronic pancreatitis, which needs to be addressed. Any pancreatic duct stenosis, an endoscopic ultrasound guided cystogastrostomy in case there is a pseudocyst communicating, and surgical resection of pseudocyst is advocated. One can also go for surgical dissection and segmental dissection of the mesenteric or the portal veins, removing the fistula, which is draining the pancreatic juice into the portal bloodstream. What mostly happens is a delay in the diagnosis, leading to a delay in the treatment and leading to high mortality, especially in the patients with pancreatitis or carcinomas. Management of these patients when detected for the pancreatitis and polyarthritis part is purely symptomatic with NSAIDs and corticosteroids. And anti-secretagogues such as octreotide only can show a suboptimal response. Ultimately, the treatment is surgical by disrupting the fistula, which is responsible for the clinical picture. In conclusion, I'd like to say that 50% who recover from pancreatic disease have pancreatic disease, peripheral joint and skin lesions heal without sequelae. And 50% patients from the literature have shown that 50% patients develop chronic arthritis, which was independent of pancreatic disease, and sustained this even after pancreatic enzymes fell to normal levels. PPP syndrome has to be taken into consideration when we don't know the origin of this osteonecrosis, necrosis or the polyarthritis, and the panniculitis picture remains unclear. So always one needs to keep this fact in mind as to the disease origin or the cause being from the pancreas. Now, when abdominal symptoms are absent, as already mentioned, this can delay the diagnosis of the underlying pancreatic disease. Hence, emphasize that always this needs to be kept, an abdominal cause needs to be kept in mind when the constellation of these symptoms are present. Measuring the lipase, skin or bone biopsies will show pathognomic features, and if appropriate, a surgical exploration is warranted. And once this has been advocated, if it is successfully advocated, this can lead to complete remission of the disease. I'd like to conclude this presentation. I hope I was.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Akshardhar. That was an excellent presentation, and indeed, it's a very rare case that you have presented today. I just have a couple of questions. Were you able to identify a fistula when you operated?
There was a thickening between the uncinate process and the SMV, sir. A clear-cut fistula was not visible, however.
Was there any blood in the pancreatic duct?
In the pancreatic duct on opening, there was no evident blood, sir.
Yeah, it's just unusual. For whatever I could find out from the literature, usually when you have the syndrome, there's either a pseudocyst in the head, which is very close to the vein, or there is thrombosis of the portal vein with dilatation of the vein above. It fills with amylase fluid. That is what I could read from the literature. So
Right.
You had a perfectly normal superior eccentric vein, and there was no pseudocyst in this patient.
Right, sir. The thing is, there was some thickening adherent to the uncinate process and the SMV. It was not clear cut like like a pseudocyst. We just sheared it off, and there was some bleeding from which we acquired control, but there was no clear cut pseudocyst filled with fluid. That kind of picture was not there. The only prior CT finding was a right portal vein, a branch of the right portal vein, which was thrombosed, but it was not anywhere close to this either.
Yeah, because in the literature, the communication has also occurred in the tail, not only in the head region. So the communication may be to the splenic vein or to the portal vein. Then usually the pseudocyst is the indicator as to where the fistula may be. But then I think this was managed very well, and definitely the physician who thought of this and did the abdominal CT did a good job. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the audience? Joshi sir?
Rajesh, you can see the chat box and address the questions in the chat box.
Okay.
Were you sure that you were dealing with this condition before you decided to operate on this patient, or it was just an empirical plan?
So there was no 100% diagnosis, but with seeing the amylase levels and the picture of seeing the amylase and lipase levels and the clinical picture that there was some pancreatic panniculitis as suggested by the pathologist, we had in mind that there could be a fistula which we were not able to get on the imaging. So bearing this in mind, we proceeded because the patient's quality of life was also not improving.
Okay, we'll address some of the questions. There's a question from Dr. H. Ramesh. What was the CRP at the time of presentation and at the time of surgery?
It was around 90, sir, the CRP.
Okay, and at the time of surgery, I mean, did you repeat it or?
In the 2 weeks that, during the 2-week stay, the CRP went up or it come down?
At the time of, what do you call, we took over the case at a later stage, sir. So initially, we had seen that the CRP was, our diagnosis was 90. But I don't think the repeat CRP was done to see whether there was a raise or a drop.
Yeah, serial CRP would have told you. Now I have some general questions that what was the thought process of the treating team when you see a patient who has, okay, there is a possibility of panniculitis, but the possibility that we are also dealing with an obscure collagen vascular disorder or some such with a raised CRP and general markers of inflammation, to embark on a pancreatic surgery. What was the thought process of the treating team in general?
Right, so the rheumatologists did not have a clear-cut diagnosis because their serum markers were, the ANA was negative, rheumatoid factor was negative. In fact, there was a very high lipase and amylase, and no features of pancreatitis, and there was panniculitis everywhere. So things were narrowing down to this.
Yeah, I think we should congratulate the rheumatologist for having been able to declare that there was no,
This was
collagen vascular, because it's so difficult to rule out, as you know. It's possible to diagnose it, but sometimes it presents in the most obscure fashion. And my concern is whether it will still rear its head again in the future. If you have a fistula, let us say, what is the unit thought process about how they wanted to go about delineating it? Is delineation of a fistula to the vessel such an easy task? How do one propose to accomplish it? What was the philosophy of the unit at that time? Did they have a thought processes how they would go about it?
We were not scared. There was the fistula, even if present, was very obscure, sir. It was not clear cut. So delineating it would actually be a tedious task in this case. But
No,
however,
I agree. The question I wish to specifically raise is that when you're talking about this panniculitis syndrome, there seems to be an entity of a fistula somewhere. In the 30 cases that have been seen, some form of fistula seem to have been diagnosed, and the fistulization seems to have been to a venous channel. Yet there was no drop in hemoglobin, there was no hemosuccus pancreaticus. So one wonders whether that really did exist, because it's inconceivable that with a positive pressure in the portal vein and a leak into the pancreatic duct, that there would not be some bleeding and manifesting as bleeding itself, overt bleeding. So do you have a comment on that?
Right, sir. Regarding this, the post-operative picture, intraoperatively also you can see some adhesion between the uncinate and the SMV, no clear-cut fistula. And post-operative, the patient improved and there was a drop in amylase and lipase level. This points out that there was a fistula. And coming to the other cases,
why does it point out that there is a fistula? Because the amylase and lipase, does it come from the superior mesenteric vein? I suggest to you that the drainage of the pancreatic ductal system is what is responsible for the drop in enzymes, not the dealing with the fistula. I suggest to you, do you wish to respond?
Right, sir, but yes, sir, but that usually in that kind of picture, the serum amylase and lipase levels are usually 10 times more than the normal limit. Here it was almost 100 times more than the normal limit. This would explain a direct entry into the bloodstream itself, rather than what we see usually. These were levels were in thousands.
So are you suggesting that what happened when the patient was re-explored was actually the fistula that you did not, bother to earlier dissect out? Now you
Not really.
dissected out.
The re-exploration only showed that there was some blood in the plane of dissection, but that had nothing to do with the fistula. The fistula was addressed, and we can see a drop on POD1 itself, as I had already mentioned.
So let us say that you did not dissect the uncinate process of the SMB substantially. Am I right?
So we dissected off pretty clear, sir.
You dissected the uncinate process of the SMB. Is that a routine part of surgery for chronic pancreatitis usually?
That depends on the surgery we are trying to address. If it's a drainage process, if it's a drainage thing that we do, we would not address the uncinate process unless if it's a resection and a drainage surgery that we are going for. Then that's when we would go to that particular part. That's what we would do.
Dinesh, you want to add some comments?
Good evening, sir. Ramesh sir has brought out some pertinent points, and actually I would like to say that there was significant addition of the uncinate to the SMB. We had to loop the SMB above and below, thinking that there would be a significant fistula. And when we separated it, there was a rent. There was an area of SMB which was unhealthy, which was repaired with proline. That didn't come out well during the presentation. However, the point that why was there no blood in the pancreatic duct is very pertinent. The stone and the uncinate dilated duct was impinging on the SMB, but there was no blood in the duct when we opened it. Probably there was a proximal stricture and the pressure in the ductal system may have been high. I do not know, we can only guess. But pre-operatively, when we spoke to the family, we told them that we are not sure whether there is a fistula because we had not objectively demonstrated a fistula. We told them we are exploring because there is a very high possibility that there is a fistula. And then after surgery only we'll be able to say whether we are able to address this problem. Fortunately, we could identify an area which is badly stuck to the SMB, dissect the uncinate off, deroof the uncinate duct up to the main pancreatic duct. Dr. Ramesh Rajan had asked the question whether the remaining duct was dilated. It was not. So we did not lay open the entire duct, just the uncinate, and the proximal part of the main pancreatic duct was deroofed. Following surgery, there was a significant drop in enzymes and clinical improvement, which substantiates that there was probably a fistula.
Was an MRCP done, Dinesh?
No, Rajesh, we did not do an MRCP, mainly because two reasons. One was CT revealed that there was a stone in the uncinate process with a dilated uncinate duct. The rest of the pancreatic duct was not dilated. So in that background, we thought as MRCP may not help.
Okay.
I think, Dinesh, would you be able to say, therefore, that the accuracy of the preoperative CT was a strong pointer to what you were dealing with?
No, sir. Objectively, we could not prove the fistula. Objectively,
no. I mean the fact that you considered that this, if you are operating a patient with chronic pancreatitis, even an uncinate process involvement, the amount of mobilization of the SMB that you would do is kind of variable, isn't it? It does not.
Yes.
It's not mandatory that you actually elevate the predominant portion of the uncinate process of the SMB.
No, we wouldn't, sir. We wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in this case, it's the imaging that has suggested to you that was necessary, and perhaps that has been the crucial, point in the patient's getting the appropriate treatment.
So imaging helped, but more than the imaging, the laparotomy was what made us suspect the area of involvement. Because when we explored, we found that very unusual that, the uncinate process is stuck to the superior mesenteric. That area was inflamed. The rest of the area was not. So we thought, it is only a thought, that probably this area may be the area of the pathology. It's all inflamed and stuck to the SMV at that point. So we tried dissecting the uncinate. Usually we wouldn't do this dissection. There's no need to dissect the uncinate of the SMV if the plan is to deroof the duct. So here the intent was to see if there is a fistula, and we were prepared to face a bleed. That's why, as Akshadhar pointed out, we looped the SMV and the portal vein, suspecting that if there's a major tear or a bleed, we should be able to repair it. So that was done before we started the dissection. And then when we separated it from the SMV, there was an area of SMV which was unhealthy, which bled and which was repaired with 6-oproline. So the area of interest, I would say the target, the point was at that particular area.
Rajesh, this is Ramesh here.
Yeah. Sure.
Can I make Dinesh, was there any small stone at that particular point which seemed to be eroding into the vein?
No, there was a stone. Again, the CT cut did not show that particular that stone, but there was a stone. We were palpating the uncinate, there was a stone. We cut over the stone actually to identify the duct. So we cut over the stone express.
So probably in order to remove that stone, in the process of removing the stone, you would anyway have to open up that rent on the SMV, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah.
Probably, yes.
Yes, but very surprisingly, like Nimesh sir had pointed out, there was no blood in the ductal system.
Yeah.
That is something which I cannot explain. There was no blood in the ductal system.
Fine.
Dr. Rajesh, can I?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Just some, speculations and observations from this very interesting study. Let me congratulate the doctor and the entire team of Amrita for the excellent presentation of a very, very rare entity. One is there is an indirect clue regarding the site of fistulization. For example, it's only a speculation because, see, there is some abnormal connection between the uncinate process and the right lateral wall of SMV, especially for the intraoperative finding. And similarly, there is a thrombosis in the right posterior portal vein in the preoperative CT. In case of biliary strictures, for example, post-transplant biliary strictures, when there is an absolute obstruction in a duct or a segmental duct, there is a documented cholangiovenous reflux. And it can manifest as a thrombosis in the corresponding or the draining hepatic vein. Similarly, there is a laminar flow in the portal venous system. If there is a lateral connection in the SMV, usually it goes in the right lobe or even right posterior. It is almost similar to a cecal amoebiasis. Right colon amoebiasis produces a right-sided liver abscess. So absolutely, there is some connection between this right posterior portal vein thrombosis as well as the connection between the uncinate process and right side of SMV. And it is similar to something like a biliovenous reflux. It could be a pancreaticovenous reflux. And how high was the amylase? It was in lakhs or thousands or hundreds?
Thousands. 3,000. Amylase was 1,800 and lipase was 3,000.
So
3,500. Sorry.
Excellent. So and one more comment. Just like the cholangiovenous reflux in very tight segmental biliary strictures, if there is a very tight stricture and there is absolutely no outflow for the pancreatic fluid, and it's a very tight system, depending on the pressure difference between the pancreatic ductal system and the portal venous system, blood can go in either direction. In this case, probably the PD pressure was so high that we could not see any blood in the pancreatic duct or in the as hemosuccus pancreatic, as Ramesh sir was pointing out. And secondly, is there any, it's a random thought, any role of intraoperative pancreaticogram to document or to display the the pancreaticovenous reflux or fistula?
I think if there was a definite fistula, when they opened the pancreatic duct, they would have had a bleed, isn't it? There's another question from Tony Jose. Could ERCP have been useful both diagnostically and therapeutically? Dinesh, would you like to?
Rajesh, I just typed the answer. It's a very interesting question. And we didn't think about doing an ERCP at that point because all of us were carried away with all this pancreatic panniculitis and the very high lipase level that we were presuming that there is a fistula at this point. We didn't sort of explore the possibility of doing an ERCP to demonstrate the fistula. Probably an ERCP and injection under pressure might have helped, but then ERCP is an invasive procedure. It carries its own risk. The patient has never had a pancreatitis per se, and what if he gets a ERCP-induced pancreatitis? So every investigation carries a risk. How far we should push an investigation when there is a very strong clinical suspicion of a possibility, I do not know. I would like to hear from senior people like Ramesh sir on what he would have done at that point. Would he have gone to objectively demonstrate the fistula, or is clinical suspicion and a laparotomy an okay option in this situation?
I think it's a wonderful decision to have operated the patient, because there's not when you go over the case, it seems that there is just enough uncertainty that you're not sure what you're going to deal with. The main pancreatic duct does not seem to be involved. It's almost like an abscess of the uncinate process, which is adjacent to the superior mesenteric vein with high amylasemia, high enzymemia. So I mean, I think I must just congratulate the decision makers, and I think that's where I feel that the fact that the patient had such a thorough evaluation for possible other causes, and they were all ruled out, was a huge benefit. Because if you had seen the patient first in the GI surgery department, one would have felt very nervous about going and subjecting the patient to surgery, and we would have probably thought of getting our physician colleagues to evaluate further. And with the CRP of 90 and the ERCP, we may have had more sepsis, maybe some substantial bleeding, and some vascular catastrophe requiring emergency surgery. I think it just happened that the right decisions were taken, and so we can pat ourselves on the back.
Ramesh sir, I would like to confess that you're absolutely right. If it had come to us, we would have asked rheumatology help. It so happened that rheumatology had completely evaluated. And to be honest, the diagnosis was made by our resident. He was asking us why the lipase is so high, why there is no pancreatitis. We were not able to answer that question. We were looking at the CT and not finding any evidence of pancreatitis. And then he Googled and said, there's something called BPP syndrome. Now, even after reading a little bit of a case report, we were not sure. After surgery, what if, like you said, that part was there. So we counseled the family and said, there's a possibility. We are doing a laparotomy. We never told them about, we're going to do a pancreatic surgery. This is probably a way. And they agreed. So, it was probably in the end a good outcome, but there could have been problems.
Any biopsy of the pancreatic head parenchyma done?
Pardon, Arun?
Any biopsy of the pancreatic head parenchyma as part of coring or something, a bit of tissue? Do we have any?
I can't remember from my mind. Akshadar, do you remember? Shweta, please.
Yes, sir. It was sent and it was reported as normal pancreatic tissue inflamed, but there was no malignancy or any other specific thing from that biopsy.
Did it show chronic pancreatitis?
It did show features of inflammation, yes, chronic pancreatitis.
No, just not inflammation. I mean, specifically, it showed features of chronic pancreatitis. The reason we are asking the question is it a kind of a isolated duct involvement in chronic pancreatitis, which has exploded into the neighboring vasculature and which may have no long-term prospects? I mean, the patient may or may not get further main duct involvement. The patient may or may not get further symptoms. It remains to be seen, but I wonder whether it just showed acute pancreatitis or whether it showed features of chronic pancreatitis with fibrosis and
from what I remember, the biopsy report, it said features of chronic pancreatitis.
Okay, that's good now.
So I would like to just add that Akshadar would have mentioned that the medical team had actually evaluated for chronic pancreatitis. So not just the structure, the function part also they evaluated. So the fecal elastase, all that was done, and I think it was abnormal. So probably he had chronic pancreatitis. Imaging, biopsy, and fecal elastase was done.
Do we have any post-operative CT, any follow-up CT?
Yes, sir. We actually did a post-operative CT as well.
Did it
Yes,
show
sir.
anything special, or what happened to the right posterior portal vein thrombosis?
That was the remaining status quo only, sir.
Arun, can I answer that? Arun, the CT was done for a different purpose. Actually, there was no change in post-operative. I mean, it was done in the 2 weeks after the surgery. Why? Because his drain amylase was high. It was like a pancreatic fistula. Very small amount, but high drain amylase. So we did do a CT to rule out a collection. But then the amylase levels dropped. The output was very little. If I remember, it was a very low output fistula, and we could, at the time, discharge, remove the drain. So there was one post-op CT, but that was done with the intent of looking at a collection and things before discharge, because he was going to Andamans.
Dinesh, what happened first? Was it the suspicion by the resident on Googling, or the pathologist reporting the skin biopsy as suspicious?
Dr. Amish, actually, it was the resident who took the consultation, and when he went through the reports, there was this biopsy and all that.
And then he went back to the pathologist and...
No, not pathologist. I think he called up the dermatologist to ask what is all this, and she said it is pancreatic pancreatitis. Then he called. I mean, on that day I was the on-call person, so he called and told me all these interesting details. And I mean, I was not very sure. I've never heard about this before, so I didn't know. But then gradually we chanced upon this diagnosis.
I think we can highlight the name of that resident. There is no problem.
Yeah, Dinesh, can we know his name?
Yeah, it was Lohit. He passed out. He's not with us now. So it was Lohit Shetty who saw the consultation on that day.
Yeah, I think we should all give him a big hand. Yeah, it was a good diagnosis.
Are there specific pathological features of pancreatic panniculitis as such, or it's I'm totally unaware of hearing it for the first time?
No, they mentioned fat necrosis, enzymatic fat necrosis, and calcification. Maybe that's why they diagnosed it as pancreatic panniculitis.
Just because a patient has the raised amylase lipase, it is interpreted like that, or there are specific histopathological features to say pancreatic panniculitis?
There are specific features, sir, such as foam cells, giant cells, and there's deposition of amorphous material and neutrophilic infiltrated calcification as well. It was showing an enzymatic necrosis kind of picture. This corresponding with the high amylase and lipase levels. So the pathologists were kind of into suggesting that it was a pancreatic panniculitis.
What was the extent of pancreatic parenchymal dissection that you did? Just that uncinate process duct alone, or it was a formal head coring like what we do in phrase procedure? Did you go to that extent?
Not as deep as a phrase procedure, sir, where we do that head coring and leave a thin limb of tissue. We did a de-roofing of the uncinate process alone.
Dr. Joshi, Dinesh, basically we de-roofed the duct first, and then we were left with the doubt that is there a stricture proximally, and is that the reason why there is no blood and the pressure inside is high and all that. So we did a bit of de-roofing, did the coring, and went on to the pancreatic head and opened up the proximal part of the pancreatic duct, just to be sure that. And then we probed the duct, and we couldn't find any stricture there beyond that point. So we did do a little bit of coring and de-roofing and expose the duct up to the main pancreatic duct.
The MPD I understood is not dilated. It was normal.
Only the proximal part was dilated. The remaining duct was not dilated.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, in that case, I hand the meeting back to Dr. Joshi. Can you take over?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rajesh, for the moderation. And can I ask Dr. Arun to give the answer for the quiz?
Sure, sir, sure. Can I request Dr. Akshadhar to stop sharing his screen?
Yes, sure, sir.
Sorry, I'm not able to go back to my PowerPoint, but it was a simple case and everyone answered it very well. It was a left paracolic hernia or left mesocolic hernia, also known as left paraduodenal hernia. One of the rare but congenital internal hernias. It can present in adult life, and so many correct answers. But the person who stood up with a complete correct answer first time is Dr. Jigar, J-I-G-R, Dr. Jigar. He mentioned it as left paraduodenal hernia. Congratulations. And you may please contact Dr. Joshi as well as Dr. Ramachandran for your prize. Thank you so much for the wonderful opportunity. Back to Dr. Joshi, sir.
Dr. Ramachandran, could you just take over for the vote of thanks? Ramachandran is not there.
Right, sure. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
So thank you all. We had an excellent academic session. Thank you, Akshadar. You have presented, discussed the case very well. Thank you, Shweta, Dinesh, and the AIIMS team for mentoring him. It was really a new information for most of us. And thank you, Rajesh, for the excellent moderation and
Thank you. You're welcome.
discussion. Thank you, all the participants. Thank you, IML, for the quiz program. And thank you, Pidambaran, the man behind the show. Thank you all. So we'll meet again next month.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you, everyone. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Rajesh.